did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
I want to say another big good evening going out to each and every single one of you across the globe. Saturday night, 6 o'clock GMT.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
We got another live show on Issues today.
I paid for my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care.
Whatever you're doing, wherever you might be,
About survival.
kick back and relax.
I had too many.
We have our dear friend and guest, Andy Christopherson from Burke Media, with an Albuquerque update,
I was good with my hands and very
looking at policing and police brutality in New Mexico in particular.
I was getting money, life was so sweet. Now things have changed, the whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man, don't need no gun.
Over the last couple of years that we've done this show, we have visited Albuquerque on numerous occasions
All in jail.
and had some horrifying stories come out of there. Today we find out,
I paid for my crime.
especially under this new regime,
Get my time.
new government, new president,
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
we get an update.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
I wonder, has things got any better since our last visit?
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was
We say a big hello going out to
I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common.
all the folk at Burke Media,
Much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd shoot you up and spit you out,
Diana and Elza.
especially all you haters.
I would say a big hello to Steve in particular. Hope you get well soon, sir. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. I'll say no more, leave it there. But there's lots of love going out there, my friend.
Time, pay for my crime. Already did my time. Already did my time. Pay for my crime. Already did my time.
As always, want to say a big thank you going out to our producer, Teresa, for all the hard work she does. Getting these guests organised, these shows put together, and getting us ready to go out live on Issues today.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Don't forget, if you're just tuning in, you can get us live on www.worldjamglobal.com.
And live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen. Statewide.
And we're going out live from Coventry.
There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
All these last minute
I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
add-ins, passwords, and
Already did my
I think that's the real reason for me playing in the opening track, you know, so I can get everything else set in time.
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly.
We're live on World Jam Global Radio, my friends.
I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb. My brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd shoot you up and spit you out.
We have got some great shows coming up for you in the next coming weeks.
Already did my time. Paid for my crime.
I ask you to support and continue to keep your eyes open as we
I paid for my crime.
almost heading into the second half of this year.
Right now, he could be facing life in prison.
There we go.
Cope with this living hell. Trying to cope with this living hell.
Looks like I've got everything ready now. Sound check okay. Visuals are okay. The video's okay. The sound is okay. More importantly, you, our wonderful audience, you're okay. Don't forget, you can also join us in the chat room. You can drop in some questions if you like.
Who are in heaven.
Or you could just listen as me and Andy just ramble on.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And
World Jam Global Radio, this is clarity.
For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Okay, here we go. We're gonna stop right there, and we're gonna bring in our wonderful guest Andy Christopherson from New Mexico, Albuquerque. And good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, Andy. Whatever time of day it is in the side of the world where you're from. I think it's afternoon, isn't it?
Hey, Kerbin. Yeah, it's like 11 o'clock in the morning our time.
Okay, well,
So
it's good morning. First, would you do us the honor of just letting the audience have a reminder of who you are, what you do, and then we'll take it from there, my friend.
Sure. Yeah, I work for BerkeleyMedia.com. We're a activist-driven grassroots media website that provides content on mostly local issues, New Mexico issues in particular. We have covered some other issues outside the state, but we really primarily focus on police brutality, any statewide correction, but police violence is how we got our start, and I'm going to spend some time talking about some of that today.
Yeah, and in talking about that, I mean, we've done quite a few shows together over the last couple of years or so, Andy, and some of them have been quite gruesome. Very troubling and worrying, especially as we've looked at the statistics in Albuquerque in particular, and the rise of unlawful killing and police brutality, and the amount of offences against unarmed individuals and defenceless individuals by police in Albuquerque. And when we looked at some of the stats that came up in Albuquerque in comparison to the rest of America, it was quite appalling. And it never seems to amaze me with some of the storylines that we get coming out. But a question, I suppose, first question I want to really ask you as we head in. We're in 2017 now. We've been doing shows with you since 2015. I know that because I was looking back on some of the videos that go way back to 2015, long before it was announced that Donald Trump was going to go in for the presidential run for president. So has policing got any better in 2017? And I'll say that with tongue in cheek, because over here in the UK, as I said to you when we was having a conversation the other day, our first three headlines on our newspapers, on our TV screens is Trump, Trump, and Trump. So has policing got any better in 2017, or has things just been missed or swept under the carpet or misplaced due to the Trump dominating the news?
Well, in Albuquerque, there's a few things going on. There's really no definite answer to that. In some ways, policing's gotten a little bit better, but for the most part, it hasn't. The Department of Justice came here in 2014 to reform the entire police department. And just a month ago, our latest report was saying that the command staff was purposely thwarting the reform process, purposely not complying with the Department of Justice. Well, under the new Trump administrations with Jeff Sessions heading the DOJ, they sent in a team to say basically we're worried about morale. So they're pretty much unzipping all of these consent decrees, making them pretty much useless, saying, well, it was under Obama, so anything that was under Obama isn't worth, doing anymore. So all the work that went into slowing the killings of policing looks like, they're not going to reform after all. So even though there's been this period where they haven't shot as many people as they did between 2009 and 2014, they're going to get the green light to basically continue those practices. The other thing is we're very understaffed with police. I saw some crazy numbers where in the part of town that I live in, there's a given 5 officers on the street per shift and I live in a very highly populated area. So they're so understaffed that they don't make it to calls anyway. So the dynamics of policing has sort of changed in a few ways. So it's hard to say whether policing has actually gotten any better or any worse. It's hard to really say one or the other. But I will say that the killings by Albuquerque police have gone down. But at the same time, Bernalillo County sheriffs, they cover Albuquerque also because they're county police, and the U.S. Marshals haven't skipped a beat. They've killed people all along. It's not reported the same way because it's not the Albuquerque Police Department. But here's the thing: Bernalillo County sheriffs and the U.S. Marshals don't have to wear lapel cameras. So it sort of seemed like this shift from when the Department of Justice came in and laid down the hammer. It seemed like the shift to killings just got transferred is all. And the number of police complaints are still very, very high since the DOJ's been here. But the Police Oversight Board is getting no help and is being screwed over by, once again, a very corrupt command staff. So there's really no data to go off of that's, definite data to go off of in the last few years because we're not really getting the whole story in the first place. But as far as those complaints, like the beating complaints, and we don't have to talk about just killing. Albuquerque police were known for beating the homeless and mainly beating the homeless. That's what, in the mentally ill, that's what they did. They used to have a wake-up call where they would go find people sleeping on the street, step on their leg, and smack the bottom of their foot with a baton to wake them up. And they call it the homeless wake-up call. Those kind of complaints are still there, but we're just not hearing or seeing them for some reason. They're going through the Citizen Police Oversight Board, but then that's it. It doesn't make it to our mainstream media. So what is policing getting better? I don't think so. I just think that some of the violence has just been transferred is all.
How does that leave the people of Albuquerque feeling as far as a level of confidence in the policing is concerned? Because for me, isn't policing about attitude and mentality?
It is. But you mean as far as the community's reaction to how it's been?
Yeah.
I think that Albuquerque's become normalized to violence. We have the highest crime rate in the country per capita. We have, the highest amount of opioid deaths per capita. We have the highest. We're dead last in education. We're either dead last or number one in all the wrong categories. So the community is normalized to the violence, to not only the crime violence, but to the police violence as well. And I think that when you get to a point where you're desperate for a normal society, you start normalizing the behaviors of the police. What do they do because the society's so fucked up? We might, let's go ahead and just let them do their job, and they normalize it. So a lot of the reaction that we saw after the James Boyd killing has really gone away over the last few years. And people have, they were upset of James Boyd and some of the others that had been killed. And there still is that group of people that, saw things for what they were. But I would say, in general, the majority of the population, they're okay with the violence. They're okay with the police doing their thing because, I mean, look, Dinah and we've been on the streets from the beginning of this latest movement, and we had heavy numbers after James Boyd was killed. We had heavy numbers in the street demanding police justice. The DOJ came in here, laid out the groundwork, and everyone thought, cool, the work is done. At least we got the attention here. And as time has gone on, nothing has changed in the reform process, nothing. Other than the fact that some of the cops get a little bit more CIT training, which hasn't seemed to do anything anyway. As time's gone on, a lot of this shit's got swept under the rug. And there's been an awful lot of killings that nobody talks about, and it's a strange thing to watch from my perspective, because when I first started Burke Media with Dinah, there was a very angry community towards the way policing was being done, and now it's completely changed to they feel more sympathy for them. A couple cops get shot. A little girl gets tortured in a bathtub and lit on fire and shit. And all of a sudden, things like that start making the police illegal actions justified.
I mean, this recent issue on Friday, on Friday just gone, man dies after police using taser while trying to arrest him.
Yesterday, man.
Yeah, yesterday itself. Now, some might argue that this was a perpetrator, somebody in pursuit of criminal activity.
He stole something. So
he wasn't. I mean, he still deserves justice, but he wasn't shot. You wouldn't call that excessive use to restrain him, because a taser is what we've been calling on, and had most of the people that died been tasered, who were not in pursuit of criminal activity, they would all be alive today. Philando Castile, for example, had he been dealt with differently, we wouldn't have been talking about a fatality. So, I mean, how are people viewing this particular issue? Because some will argue that it's not altogether a case of brutality when they used less lethal means to restrain him.
Yeah, that's that gray line, right? We would rather the police use less lethal on people than shoot them to death. Like, look at Terrence Crutcher in Oklahoma, when what's her name, Betsy Shelby shot him. She could have used the taser, and he may not have died from the taser. At least it was like she had that option. She didn't exercise. I didn't make it to that scene last night, but this isn't the first time that someone's died from a taser. Tasers, the testing of taser products, in particular Taser International, Albuquerque Police uses taser products. And taser has a very, very controversial existence. Everything from backdoor dealings with police to get contracts in city to having no testing on their products, or very little of. One of the videos I did see of their testing of their products, they were testing it on a buffalo, and they kept tasing the buffalo over and over and over again, dropping it. This is how they tested. So can you imagine, certain people's hearts aren't going to withstand that kind of force either. So it becomes that we don't know the situation that happened there until we see the lapel camera video or dash cam video. And even at that, to these days, we don't get to see videos anymore because of the James Boyd killing. After James Boyd's death and all the changes that were implemented, APD started denying all videos until until investigations were like entirely through the court system, and they delete, edit videos. They've been caught doing this shit, so we don't even know what we're getting anyways. So unless we're there and unless we're filming, we don't know what happened to this man yet. But he died from a taser, and it happens all the time.
But that stance with the video with the body cams is a different one that's been run out and rolled out throughout the rest of the United States, right? Because they're introducing them into different boroughs and different cities, almost as a legality, right?
Yeah, well, some states or some police departments are jumping onto it, but in reality, we were the first ones. Albuquerque was the first major department in the country to outfit every single officer with them. But unfortunately, to this day, the lapel cam policy is the most violated policy in the department. Lapel camera policy, it's the most violated policy. So the lapel camera is sort of a whole other issue. It's fucked up. I mean, what's going on here is, we had to sue for lapel video. And when we did get it, it was chopped and a bunch of crap was taken out as an exemption. All these exemptions that we had to refile for, and it's not numbing, and it's hard, because you start losing hope that there's any way to even find out what's really happening unless you're there in person.
I mean, you go out to a scene or call, you hear about an incident taking place. What is your aim when you go out there as a photojournalist? What is your aim?
Like a SWAT situation, for instance, or
whatever it is.
Protest.
You hear an incident. You hear about an incident. You hear about something going out live. You hear about something or you see something being streamed and you say it's going on now. And as a photojournalist, you set out to go and reach to that destination. What's your objective when you go out there?
Just to film the police, 100%. As soon as I get there, and I get as close to the scene as I can before I get kicked back, like it always happens. But as soon as I get there, I put on the live stream, or I start recording on my phone, and I start taking snapshots. I bring a telephoto lens with me everywhere, and I start filming and shooting every single thing that I can throughout the entire time. Very rarely do we get to see anybody, because nowadays they put the crime scene tapes so far away from what's really happening to keep press away. It's a standard tactic anymore now. They really push us pretty far back. So we just get there and try to talk to witnesses, talk to anybody who might have seen something or knows who's, most of the neighbors all know each other. So, talk to the neighbors, see if they know who they're after or why they're after them. Start, looking on Facebook and stuff and try digging for information. But for me personally, I put the lens up wherever I'm at as soon as I can. I get something filming.
So here's the thing now, right? So you get to scenes, you get your lens on, you get your pictures, you talk to people. How often does the information that you've collected, either by aid of camera, video, or journalistic statements from people that you've encountered while you've been on a scene, how often have you seen that differ from the accountable reports that have been released through the normal official press agencies, i.e. for what the police release out there?
I couldn't even tell you. I couldn't even give you a number. Almost every time.
Okay, so that's...
almost every single time we go out, every single time we get back and we watch the mainstream media, and it's just robo repeat. And we've seen this with even the journalists in the White House and other places. They just repeat what is said. They repeat. They don't have a narrative or an angle. All they do is go there and they say, "This is what we believe is happening. This is what the police are saying. Have a good night." That's it. So we hang out and we get everybody together and we film the mundane. We film everything that's even not interesting, but you never know. But I can't tell you, Kervin, how many times our first-hand eyewitness account has completely contradicted the police and mainstream media narrative.
I mean, there have been occasions when you've been on protests, for example, demonstrations, with and seen provocateurs, for example, turn up.
Oh, sure.
And turn the thing upside down. And yet, especially with where Black Lives Matter is concerned, it's the storylines are always turned upside down, and it's made out to be the protesters that have created all of the havoc, that have caused the violence, etc. Give us an example, Andy, so we can get a real understanding of the total left and right of a journalistic response to a particular incident.
All right. Well, for instance, after the James Boyd verdict, there was an incident where people had lined up the street to block off the streets and, just shutting it down. But the way they did it here was they would shut down the street for a few minutes and then let cars go through and then shut it down again. So they weren't completely shutting down the streets. Well, couple cars decided to plow through the line of protesters that had linked arms. So one of them had taken his sign and hit the hood of the truck, and the guy barreled through the line and took off. Later that night on the news, on the mainstream media, the only thing that was that they covered that night was that incident. It was caught by their helicopter. What they seemed to leave out was what was happening at the same time as all of that. There was a group of militiamen standing on the corner with AR-15s. SWAT shows up, talks to them, gives them high fives, and goes back out to the street and starts threatening arrests. So that group decided to march. They marched around maybe a block and came back to the same place. At that point, they were met with 3 city buses full of riot police. The riot cops came out, slammed an old man, didn't arrest anybody, but they were very physical. They were hitting people with their batons and pushing them down. I got it all on film. But the mainstream media narrative was, and the only focus of that whole night went on to the incident with the protester hitting the truck with the sign.
But it was making it out to be that the protesters were attacking.
Right. There was them doing it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that it takes just a few people to change an entire narrative.
Yeah.
And like you said with the provocateurs, people that come in from that aren't there to protest. I've been around so long now. I know everyone that's out there all the time. People, you see the same faces out on the streets every time, and those same faces that are the regulars, they are the ones that are going to they're the ones that are going to be accused when the violence breaks out. The violence broke out when Trump came here in May of last year, and people were burning shirts and throwing rocks and bottles at police, and the people that took the blame by the politicians and Trump and everyone that wanted to blame someone, blamed the organizers of certain protest groups or just social groups, and tried blaming them, when in reality not one single person that was arrested belonged to any of those groups. Some of those guys, I was there. I was on the front line with the smoke and all getting hit with rocks, and I saw who was starting the shit. And it was like some gangster guys from our norteños. I saw who they were, and they were not the people that got the blame. The people that got the blame for the violence were the people that go out all the time and are peaceful and that had prayer circles and shit. They're the ones that will take the brunt of any violence that goes on. So like St. Louis, same thing. When the first and especially the second uprising in Ferguson, a lot of people had come in from St. Louis to participate, and it wasn't Ferguson residents. It was people that came in from the outside. But the people that are going to take the blame through the media and all the dimwits that are reactionary and want to blame somebody for everything, that's who they blame. It's the normal protesters.
But here's the thing: there are still people who, because their only access to news and events is what they see on the TV, have now formed an opinion based on what they've seen about protesters and those particular protests. And these are not people that are actually on the streets. These are not people that are protesting. These are people that are just sitting at home, who've now got their TVs on. The news comes on, and they show this guy hitting the car with his sign, and all they're left to think by the end of the reporter's broadcast is that these guys are no different to thugs, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what happens.
And the thing is that there are so many people that refuse to believe that there could be another angle to this. That what they've seen on the TV must be correct, because these reporters are genuine. These police officers are for real, and these explanations that are being given are the truth, because that's their TV and that's what their TV's told them. But they've not been witness to what's taken place out there. I'll share with you very quickly two incidences. There was one when we did the Cardiff 3 campaign, and we had Al Sharpton come over from America and march with us through the streets of Cardiff for the Cardiff 3. And again, you're talking about a case where 5 individuals were sentenced to life. 3 individuals were sentenced to life. There were 5 that were arrested, 2 were acquitted, 3 were found guilty and sentenced to life for a murder we know that they didn't commit. Bearing in mind that the chief of the CID had been on national TV talking about this singular white man who had the blood of this woman's blood on his hands, and was seen by several eyewitnesses outside her home the morning she died. And 10 months later, they could not find the culprits, so they went into the local community, arrested 3,000 black males, whittled them down to 5 who had nothing to do with each other, and took them all to court. 2 acquitted, 3 found guilty. And then what they did was, once they were found guilty, we then started this campaign. But on this campaign, one of the police officers who were involved, and Satish, who's been on my show on several occasions, wrote the book Fitted In. And that's what the book was about, Fitted In. These guys were just fitted in to this police scenario. And one of the officers who was actually involved in it because he had a personal agenda against one of those that he arrested was actually on the demonstration in plain clothes, walking along, trying to goad people into, trying to provoke people into an aggressive reaction so that they can actually find a way to get the police that were standing by locally to come and bombard and run down this demonstration. Nobody never took the bait. We didn't react. We didn't respond. And the guy that they were trying to get hold of, we put a defense ring around him to stop him from reacting, because he was lethal. He had a dog with him, and he wanted to go for this officer because this officer was in plain clothes. But that's how far they go to provoke you.
We've spotted informants, Kervin, that have come in. As a matter of fact, that same protest I was just talking about, after the James Boyd verdict last October, there were 2 guys. One of them we had recognized from a march from 2 years previous, who had been in an incident during a protest. He showed up, and so did some other guy that we didn't recognize. And throughout that march, when they took off from the SWAT to go march, those 2 were yelling shit to try to incite the crowd. And one of them is an informant. We have documented him from 2 years beforehand, and they literally will implant people into situations to instigate. That's not going to say that happens every time, but it is something that people have got to stop ruling out. Yeah. This happens. This is very real.
Oh, absolutely. And the unfortunate thing is, it's only the people that are really involved in the heart of these movements are actually aware of all the ramifications and all the different options. I suppose the point that I continue to try and make here is that General Joe Bloggs, who was sitting down at home watching the news, he's forming an opinion based on what he sees on his TV screen, which is far removed from the actual truth. So
that's why we started doing our own media. For that exact reason, was to counter what they were saying. We were the home of the second story, still are. When we formed for that reason. Unfortunately, we don't have that audience. We don't have those kind of numbers. But we had to do something. Yeah. Somebody had to come out and say, okay, enough is enough. And the precise reason we started Burkay Media was because we were Dinah was at the heart of organizing those actions. I was documenting them, and I was coming home and seeing it on the news and just being appalled because they were spinning it to demonize people that were exercising their First Amendment rights and that were very well justified in being angry. But the media turns it on them as being the perpetrators of violence. And since this new Trump campaign, things have changed with protesting on the streets. It's gotten a lot different, you know.
Hey, but how different? What would you say? What would you mean by different? How different has protesting got?
Well, but before Trump came in, we started seeing violent actions on the streets from just Joe Blows, from just passerbyers. We started seeing an increase during his campaign. We started seeing an increase of people yelling shit or throwing things or, coming up to the protest and engaging people when they normally wouldn't. And Trump came through here at this time last year, and when he during his speech and during his rally before I was thrown out, I heard him in this tirade against the media and against people that are protesting, and of course people were getting thrown out here out of the rallies that were protesting. And while they're getting thrown out of the rallies, he's yelling shit about the protesters. So then these loonies are leaving his rallies and they're looking for trouble. Now they're emboldened to go out and physically stop protesters. And since he came through that first time, I've seen militiamen on our streets with AR-15s. I've been personally beat up for being media. The violence has increased. There's always been a chance of something, and every single action you usually get a few passerbyers that want to scream or whatever. But lately, it's been actual physical interactions. And now we've got, I don't know if you heard of that guy in Montana, the senator who body slammed a reporter. This kind of stuff gives a green light to people to just assault. The guy in Berkeley, the base stick man, they call him, who was rapping anti-fascist with a stick, has become a hero among that group and should be in prison for assault. But he's not. And this is where we get into a whole other issue of selective policing. But it has changed. But
the bottom line is, if the response had been different, in other words, if provocateurs become the recipients of an attack, then the protesters are arrested quite quickly as aggressive, violent thugs, but not in defense. More or less seen as the attackers, right?
I don't know. I've seen it go both ways. I mean, I don't understand. I've seen the police watch the people that need to be arrested doing things in front of their face and them not do anything, and then arrest people down the road through the media. Like they have these witch hunts. Find this guy who was caught on camera. He did this, even though there's no proof of it. But I was standing at the front lines. How come they didn't arrest the people that were actually starting shit? I think they actually want that stuff. I honestly think that a lot of times police, they may complain about the protest, but they're getting paid overtime. They get to go out there and beat on the people that they hate the most. They get to wear all their war apparel and all their gear, and they get to mask up and they get to act. And that's what they signed up for. So in reality, those kind of responses, I think, are very welcome by the police. I think they enjoy it. Then they get to use it against the protesters through their controlled media and use the narrative to disparage them. So
we've often talked in the past, Andy, especially when David Ramey was on the show, of how militant the police approach these particular demonstrations and protests nowadays, and how much of that actually provokes the reaction that the police are looking for?
I couldn't even. It's hard to say, but it's amazing. It's night and day before they show up. I tell you what, even before a protest, I've been in a situation on the streets where it was a guy that they were looking for, and it wound up turning into a SWAT situation. The moment that the SWAT team shows up with their gear, their long rifles, and they wear army gear. It's all green. They don't wear police blue, the blue hat. They wear army helmets with the cameras on them and the lights and flashlights and all their gadgets and get-go, and they gear up. They have trucks of gear. And as soon as they pull up, the dynamic of the scene instantaneously changes every fucking time. And on protests, it's the same thing, if not worse, because you've already got some hostile people out there. They wouldn't be in the street if they weren't angry. We don't just take to the streets because it's fun. It's because we're enraged about something. So when they bring out that kind of militarized equipment, it absolutely changes the dynamic of the scene instantaneously. Instantly, because then you get people, and especially the super young guys that are out there. You hear them instantly saying, "Why the fuck are you bringing this out here? Why?" And they'll be yelling that shit. This is over. This is ridiculous. It absolutely instigates every freaking time.
Let's talk about before a demonstration. Is there any effort put in by those that are leading, heading, or organizing these protests and demonstrations? Is there any effort made in reminding the protesters, the demonstrators, that they want a peaceful outcome, that they want people to hold their peace and not retaliate and not react? How much effort is put into trying to make sure that those that are following are going to try and stay in line and toe the line?
It's hard. I mean, every group is different. And the way they handle it is different too. I think that what I saw a couple years ago, where a lot of the older protesters, I call them I've been doing this for 20 plus years group. A lot of those guys were very scared after the first Boyd protest, when James Boyd was killed. The first big giant protest we had, there was over 1,000 people. It got rowdy and people got tear gassed. After that, the older heads, the older activists didn't really, they responded with really trying to curb violence at protests. So they would be out there chanting, "This is a peaceful protest." And anyone that seemed to be encouraging the violence was immediately surrounded and tried to talk to, and this and that. I see a need for, I guess, but my personal beliefs are a lot different, probably than yours on this, and I think that they killed the movement because they weren't allowing people to express themselves. For instance, if someone was just getting a violent type of tone, for instance, just dropping F-bombs and just cursing and very upset, they would a lot of these guys would come up to them and be like, "Hey, this is not how we do things. We're above that." Unfortunately, they're not understanding this new generation and how we have to change what they all failed on, because if they were successful in their movements and the way they did things, we wouldn't be dealing with the shit we're dealing with today. So I looked at it personally as you guys are just kind of out of touch, older folks, and I see why they were doing really trying to curb violence before it started. Unfortunately, that kind of what you have to say and do to accomplish that turns a lot of people away from the movement. Violence is a part of a revolution. This resisting crap isn't going to work, and we're not going to get. Obviously, our police aren't going to abide by the DOJ. They're not going to do what they're being told to do, even, no matter what. They're not going to be held accountable regardless. So
devil's advocate will say this: if we know that they're going to continually report any negative reaction to their confrontation, then if we can refrain from any negative reaction, then they'll have.
Oh yeah, I see that. Yeah. Like, I see that point of it, right? But the thing is that we can't always be worrying about what others are going to think of every little thing they do. And when it comes down to the community, see, this is where we have a disconnect between activists and the community. I hear a lot of people say, well, this guy is a great community organizer. This guy is an organizer. There's a difference between someone who is actually interested in organizing the community themselves opposed to others that are interested in organizing activists. Because activists are in their own little circle. But once you start bringing the actual community out of their homes and into the streets, then you don't have a whole lot of control over the situation, no matter how much you tell people, we don't want violence in the streets, we don't want to react like this. You can't tell that to the regular community once, the actual community starts coming out. So a lot of the activists have purposely not organized our community because they're afraid of not being able to control them like they're able to control their own little groups. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But what you're going to continually have frustrated protesters, demonstrators, especially when you're talking about provocateurs. And when the provocateurs are not just the police, but people that police allow to infringe those lines in order to cause additional confusion. There's always almost like a ignition ready to explode any moment now. And is that the circumstances that most of these protests, especially attached with Black Lives Matter, is that what they're coming across now?
I don't know. I think that we a lot of those implants that are there to start trouble, I think it's pretty far and few between. We've seen it, and we've been to most of the big actions here, and we specifically see them around anti-police issues. We don't really see them at Planned Parenthood or at our Black Lives Matter movement here is very small. Most of the time those guys are usually just messed with people on the streets, but we haven't had a violent, the cops haven't responded violently to small protests. They usually respond, big police response are usually when we have huge numbers, and it's almost always when it has to do with just them, when we're protesting them. So as far as the implants and the people that are trying to start, it happens, but it happens, but it's not as much as you might think. I mean, at least here it's not anyway. I think, we've had it, I've documented it, but when I've seen the violence hit, and I mean it, I hate even using that word violence because, I don't know, I guess to me property damage isn't so much violence, but it happens when the community in general is in the streets, when we have people that we have no idea who they are. They're just people that rolled out of downtown Albuquerque and showed up to an action. That's when we've had things happen like that, and that's part of the reason why a lot of activists don't actually organize the community, because they're afraid that if they actually organize the real community, that they would have all this violence and it's going to get pinned on them.
Yeah, but I would imagine that's also why a lot of the old guard are beginning to separate themselves from this more youthful, as they refer to.
Well, we're kicking them out. They're not separating. We're actually kicking them out. It's gotten to that point where people have literally gotten into yelling matches in the streets over it because they need to step aside. It's time. They lost. That 60s movement, they got what they needed to get done, and they got what they could done. Now it's time for us to push them out of the way, because they're not doing the job that they're supposed to be doing anyways. So.
Okay, so here's the thing. Now we've seen a lot of how Trump's arrival as a new president of the United States of America has impacted right across the world. What's the response
Yeah, we're
been?
sorry.
Yeah. What's the response been in New Mexico to Trump's election triumph?
To the actual triumph? Yeah. I mean, at first, the actual inauguration day, people took to the streets, shut down the highway, pretty angry. You know, we're a pretty blue state, and we have our demographics, and it was absolutely horrible. Unfortunately, people here are still not grasping the fact that we need to start taking the offices over ourselves. We need, like, what's the response is anger. Then what's the next response? We had the women's rally, because I won't call them a march if they don't actually march. It was a rally. They had a rally for science. There's been several immigration actions because of all the people that have been getting deported under Trump, which is something on its own. In Albuquerque, under Obama, we had a heavy amount of deportations, a shitload. But under Trump, it's happening a bit different. They're literally arresting people outside the Bernalillo County Courthouse. I covered this a couple months ago. A man was arrested. He was going in to take care of a minor traffic infraction, and was met by ICE before he even made it to the front door of the courthouse, and was arrested. And as I was out there talking to people, I met a lawyer who was representing several families who were dealing with the same thing. So I went over to her office to have a chat with her, and when we went in, she had several families sitting in the front of her office where one of their loved one had been picked up on his way. One had been picked up on his way to work. Another one had been picked up at the bail bonds office, and these aren't even serious crimes that they have committed, that they're being literally yanked out. And our ICE agents were really smart. They started doing these they're not really raids, but these arrests, and they could be taking place today for all I know. They do it in areas of town where there's a lot of undocumented people, and they do it early ass in the morning. We're talking like between 6 and 8:30 in the morning. They do a bunch of busts, or they arrest a bunch of people before our community can organize. Because one thing in Albuquerque we do have is a very, very strong immigrant advocate groups. El Centro in particular here is just the baddest. They are the best. I said baddest in the good sense. They are sick. They are awesome immigrant right activists. And if they got word of any of this happening, like, we're talking hundreds of people could be mobilized within minutes. But they do this super early in the morning. So under the Trump admin, not only has the protests gotten more violent, we've got more deportations going down that way, like brown shirt type shit.
I mean, Trump. I mean, some people call it fake news, but Trump made it perfectly clear what he thought about the Mexican immigrants in particular.
He did.
What he thought about New Mexico and Mexico. You know, build a wall around New Mexico was the claim, the alleged claim. Some people will still refer to it as fake news, and others will say, well, that's what he said. How has any changes, apart from, we were talking about the deportation, but has there been any changes as far as governmental representation in Albuquerque, New Mexico in particular, since Trump's election success?
Not yet. We're gonna have our elections here in November. So we'll see. But I think that there's going to be I can feel it already just from being involved. We're going to vote pretty blue. The left is going to take over the state over the next election just because of how horrible the GOP has represented the people. New Mexico being the poorest state in the nation now, with the new health care bill that he unraveled, or if that's what we want to call it, it's going to devastate this state. So as far as the governmental changes, we're going to find out soon enough.
Are people holding their breath? Are people, I mean, there's got to be some sort of anxiety, some sort of fear as to what these repercussions are going to be.
Well, yeah, I think we're feeling the same fears as everybody else, but I think in particular, maybe just as we're a little harder just because of our economic situation here, and just our poverty levels are so hard. It just makes things even worse. I mean, they're cutting, food stamps. They're cutting, all the healthcare and food stamps and every type of benefit that hurts people in need. It's going to hit us hard, and it hasn't quite hit us just yet. But it's pretty devastating. Every day it's something new. And as far as Albuquerque is concerned, we're going to get it worse than anyone else just because we are in worse shape than everyone else. We don't have a whole lot of wiggle room here,
No, I mean, for me, I'm kind of wondering. It would be like the Prime Minister coming into Ladbroke Grove or Paddington, which is a very tight-knit black community, and saying, well, by the way, and there have been fears of propaganda, people saying things like, when the Tories get into a government, all black people will be repatriated, and nonsense like that. But we know it's not really. It can't be done. Fortunately, I think our legislation over in this country is making it impossible for them to be able to do anything like that. Even if we was to lose a Conservative government and get a National Front government in, they're going to find it very difficult to get those sorts of legislations in.
And the same thing here. Even with who we have in place, it's going to be very hard to get a lot of those extreme type of policies through.
So is that why they're trying to go through the back door to get the immigrants out? Early dawn raids before people can wake up, and by the time everybody's woken up, they've already been shipped out and gone.
Well, yeah. Well, they're smart. They're doing it because in New Mexico we would literally stop them, physically stop them. So they're going through the back door, all right, doing it early in the morning. Sure.
I mean, President Trump, the most unpopular president in the history of the United States of America. I remember just before during his presidential campaign, he dared to venture out to Albuquerque just after he made this ridiculous, outlandish statement. Tell us a bit more, because I remember we did a show shortly after that. Tell us a bit more about that. What actually happened when Trump came to Albuquerque?
Well, I was actually just talking about some of the situations just a few minutes ago. The man showed up like 3 days after Bernie was here, which was I covered. Just back up just a minute. I covered the Bernie rally 3 days before, and then the Trump rally. It was like night and day. It was like Woodstock versus a Slayer concert. It was night and day. The people here obviously came out to protest. I'll try to sum it up because that night was incredibly chaotic. But the very first part of the night or the evening when people started gathering, we had all the Trump supporters that were lined up against the convention center itself, separated from the protesters by a good 100 yards or so. Protesters were on one corner of the street that were in the shade. A lot of elder women were there, were trying to just stay out of the sun, were kicked off of that corner and forced to move closer to where the Trump supporters were entering the building. Trump supporters start coming in, then you've got the protesters literally separated by a thin piece of tape. And a lot of verbal confrontations started going back and forth, very similar to what you've seen at other cities where it started getting really crazy before people even got inside. So I covered outside for a while and then actually went into the rally itself. And as I was going through security, they were going through my camera bag and stuff, and I was watching Trump's staff walking up to any person of color and asking them what their loyalty to Trump was, trying to catch protesters before they could disrupt his rally. But to me, it was just totally racial profiling. It was something that I never thought I would see in this country ever in my lifetime. It's 2017, but then again, I'm a white guy, so that's my privilege that allowed me to not even recognize this shit until recently, and I saw it with my own eyes. I go into the rally. I meet up with our editor up on the press stage. At that time, a man named Skip Bayless was doing one of the intro speakers to Trump. He's a pastor at one of our gigantic mega churches, and he gave a Bible sermon, and that to me was very odd. I'd never thought that I would see religion intertwined in a government in a political campaign so blatantly. I know that, they're not. We have certain separation of church and state, but we know that that's not really the case. But this was so blatantly out there and in the open. It was something I'll never forget. So that gives you a demographic of who we've got in this rally. We have a bunch of white people wearing American flag apparel, listening to a Bible sermon, and then Trump comes on stage. And the very first thing he does is start ripping the media instantaneously, berating the media. People in the crowd were turning around and yelling shit at the press risers that I was on. So Trump gets on, starts doing his all of his hate speech and propaganda type speech, starts doing his thing, and people start protesting and getting kicked out and getting escorted out, which I knew just about everybody that was getting thrown out of there. So I'm documenting this from the press risers. I'm trying to get pictures the best I can from where I was of people being thrown out. And buddy of ours was getting beat up by Trump supporters. They were punching him as he was protesting and trying to actually getting escorted out. As he's getting escorted out, he's getting punched. And I got this all on film. So I went down to the Secret Service that were on the floor and showed him my photos and said, that guy, I'm pointing at the guy, that guy assaulted these protesters, get him out of here. And Trump staff came up to me and escorted me out of the building, not the people that punched him up. So as I get out of the building, I'm being escorted out to the front. I look out the window and I see the massive protests that had been outside had come through the police barricades and were up against the actual windows of the convention center. So I go running out the front to try to get in that group and try to get with them and start taking photos of that melee. And as I'm going out, I'm stopped by another Trump staff, and they're giving me shit about which way I was going. And three very young, white, Hitler Youth-looking kids tried to fight me at the same time. All three of them were going to jump me, and this was right outside the door of the convention center with APD standing idle by. I somehow got out of that, walked around the building, and I joined the protest. And within maybe an hour, the protest started, or the actual rally started getting let out. And as they were letting people out of the rally, they had to lead them out the back side of the convention center away from the protest. So the people who were out front of the protest tried to push their way into the convention center. And that's when the police showed up with their horses and knocked down a few people as they were coming up to put a a line between them and the convention center. So they knocked down this man with a cane, and that's when the rocks started flying and things started getting kind of violent. So some protesters took over a vendor's cart, chased him out of there, took his merchandise and set it on fire. Started throwing it at the cops and at the convention center. So the cops started shooting canisters of smoke at us. Well, they were pretty selective on who they shot those canisters at, and I was one of them. Being in the front there, I was filming police and not protesters, and they don't like that shit. They want you documenting them so they can use your video to go after people, not the other way around. As that happened, people started running away from the smoke, went down 3 or 4 blocks and took over, I think it was Central Boulevard, took over an intersection, and people were doing burnouts, playing music, flying Mexican flags and American flags, and it was more like a celebration. People were out there having a good time is what it was, really. And within 10, 15 minutes of that, the riot line came up, the police line came all the way up to meet them. And when they met these people who really hadn't done anything wrong, they were just, maybe they had the street taken over, which was not ideal for them, but in reality, they hadn't broken any windows at that point or done anything really that wrong. And they started firing smoke canisters and shooting people with rubber bullets, and it escalated from there. So then people really started chucking rocks and really started fucking things up. And I wound up, our editor and I wound up getting out of there okay, but Dinah and Steve, our other reporters, found themselves in an alley getting shot at with rubber bullets. They were running away from them, and we couldn't get out. We got kettled in. We couldn't get out. Typical maneuver anymore. They trap you in, they incite, and then they hold you responsible. So when Trump left, he was, his entourage had to take several ways out of the convention center area to get to the airport. So he sees all this shit happening, fires being set and everything else, and he goes to Twitter and instead, starts calling everyone in Albuquerque thugs, gangsters, or whatever the fuck he said. I can't remember word for word at the moment, but that incident was caught, MSNBC, CNN. I was all over the mainstream media news that night, actually, and unfortunately, because of that kind of attention and because of the way it went, the normal keyboard warriors that were, already hated protesters decided that they weren't going to allow it anymore. So anytime there had been a protest after that, the militia started showing up, and random people that had no affiliation with anything were showing up to try to counter actions. So Trump he had absolutely hell of an effect on what's been happening here. Him coming here has set us back very, very far. Not only with protests and the aggressiveness and the bullshit people are having to deal with exercising the First Amendment, now he won, and now we have his DOJ dismantling all the work that activists have put into changing that type of policing. A big clusterfuck, Urban.
Wow. And I mean, I really wanted you to go into that in a lot more detail. I know you flipped through it when we were talking through it earlier on, but I just felt that when you go down into somebody's backyard the way that Donald Trump did, he must have gone in there with an agenda, and that agenda was to desettle that community. And he managed to do that and almost legitimize the rise of these groups that are now arming themselves and infiltrating protests and demonstrations. And in general,
he won off of it.
Just
he gained every time he went to a city, that turned out like Albuquerque? Because we certainly were not the only ones
Absolutely
that responded.
not.
But every time that a city responded the way that this one did, his popularity grew.
Absolutely, and in fact, it almost appears as if those that were against shot themselves in the foot, but only when you take a deeper look into the provocating circumstances that led to people's anger. I mean, how it would be like the National Front wanted to go and march through the front line of Brixton, southwest London, which is predominantly almost a 90% black community. You just wouldn't. The police here just wouldn't allow it. Donald Trump was allowed to go and protest in areas, well, not protest, but go and make a representation in areas where he was just not wanted. And a lot of the people that came to support him weren't local either. From some.
Well, you know what he did was he set the groundwork for how to become popularized on the very radical right, because what he gained so much popularity from those type of responses that the dumbasses, the extreme right idiots will see the left hates free speech. So how dare they? So people like Lauren Southern or Milo or Richard Spencer or all these guys are using the exact same framework to gain notoriety and popularity through those ranks, and it's working. When he came here, all hell broke loose, and he used it to gain popularity. So you're right. There's a point where you do shoot yourself in the foot, and that's something I've been trying to tell a lot of the activists here, is that, man, you got to pick and choose and start understanding in reality that as much as we hate these motherfuckers and as much as they should be smashed out, in certain ways we're contributing to their rise.
Let's try and move on just a bit, because I'll lead into my next point actually. So how has progressive journalism been affected by all of this? Because almost in an undertone, there sounds almost a little despondency, because you've got pretty worked up journalists like yourself who have been on that front line for a long time now, and now all of a sudden, Trump seems to have the upper hand. Has it given you a rejuvenated fight, or do you feel like you're not going to get anywhere now?
Well, for myself personally, I mean, I sort of saw a lot of it coming, and I actually lost a lot of mojo. Honestly, I haven't gotten any more inspired to go after these people, because you start feeling like, well, at least this, my own personal thoughts and feelings, that it's just, you get to a point where you feel like you're beating a dead horse, and Trump has made it even worse on that end. Now, that's just me. On the other hand, I've seen journalists that were sort of dormant, producing stuff here and there, all of a sudden are just cranking out material and angry as hell because they're being discredited. So some of the guys who were not as vocal before are getting more emboldened, and thankfully, because I just don't have it in me anymore. But some of these guys are taking it pretty personally, and it's the progressive journalists in particular. And thankfully, in New Mexico, we have several progressive online media sites that are gaining a lot of popularity, and those guys they're great. They're actually doing investigative journalism. Unfortunately, what you and I see on our TVs with MSNBC and CNN and Fox, those three, and that type of reporting is robo reporting. They're robots. They're just mouthpieces to tell you what happened during the day. They're not there to do objectional journalism where they actually take both sides and decide who's right and who's wrong. Enough of this. We need both sides shit. You do need both sides, but you need both sides, and then to decide who's right or wrong here. I have a feeling that journalism, of all things, will survive through this, because so many are angry, and they were allowed before to just sit back and do minimal work.
Now they're being forced to be a little bit more aggressive, and I like it. And like that reporter asking the question about healthcare to the GOP senator in Montana. All he did was ask him a question and was body slammed. So when that kind of thing happens, I think all reporters, even if I was a conservative or a journalist, I'd be pretty pissed off, just at the rap everybody's getting. So, when that kind of crap happens and people are being physically assaulted, yeah, it angers up the masses. Hopefully, we'll be seeing more and more of it every day.
Journalism has always been a controversial profession, so to speak, because it's always what somebody writes and their perception of what they see. It's not always been the truth, which is what a lot of people have been brought up on. But progressive journalists like yourselves, who've gone to the heart of these demonstrations and protests and been able to give us a real first-hand actual report of what's really been taking place, is what's opened the eyes of people like myself to be able to do what I'm doing now. Because majority of people, they switch on their TVs, and in America it'll be CNN and Fox. Over here in the UK it'll be Sky News, ITV and BBC. For most of the world, we've been dominated by BBC News for God knows how long. It's still probably the most primary news advocate in the whole world. If they haven't got anything else, they've got BBC, whether it be on TV or radio. And that's what most people have been subjected to from the get-go. And it's only been a selective bodies that have been allowed to be able to come into that circle, that arena, and been able to submit their stories and their journalistic opinions. So 9 times out of 10, we've been false-fed news for generations, and our perception, our opinions of law and order and police have all been formed by these controlled forms of journalism. But journalism, as we know it, progressive journalism, as we now see it, has almost got a new life, a new birth, because the internet has opened up so much for us that we don't no longer have to rely on CNN and Fox and BBC. We can now be the makers of our news. We can be the genuine reporters of what we see going on in our communities. So this is not the time for people to be laying down and playing dead. This is the time where we rise up and we continue to battle. So we really take our hats off to the people like yourselves, and I hope that you don't become too despondent for too long, but you just roll your sleeves up and get right back in there, because the Donald Trumps of this world ain't going to be there forever. And the only way that they're going to be able to continue to succeed in what they're doing is if we continue to lie down and play dead and stop fighting.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But there is a point where you start getting pretty fried. I mean, every day it's a very negative world. And now, no matter what you say, no matter how much data you have, no matter how many records requests you've done and emails you've somehow got your hands on, that's fake news to certain people. Like, no matter what you say, it's fake. And a lot of that has been perpetrated from the beginning of this campaign. Now, there's always been a mistrust for the media, you're right. But what's happened over the last year is a whole other ballgame. This is a straight discrediting the media to allow these guys to get away with whatever they're doing, and so when those little 3 Hitler Youth wanted to beat me up, that wasn't because they, had a existing notion of the media. They had just listened to this lunatic riling them up about how we're the enemy of the people. How can they sleep at night? Like that kind of shit. So there's an insurgence of people that are trying to put out the media. And one of the reasons we started what we did was to give the public a voice. We wanted the people to submit articles, which they have, but not to the extent that we wanted it to go. I mean, a lot of people are so worried about the way that they write. They're so worried about being criticized for spelling or
the way they structured sentences. We have an editor, we edit your pieces, but people are so self-conscious about themselves that they're afraid to talk about the truth and about what's really happening in their own community. So it'd be nice to get, like you said, we have all these outlets. Anybody can be the media. It just takes somebody that, it takes people that are actually willing to do it, and actually get out there and start doing it.
And again, talking about the media and just taking it onto a whole new level. We were talking just the other day about this piece out in Albuquerque where the police department are now using Facebook.
Oh, God.
To criticize area judges and local news media. Now, tell us some more about that, Andy.
Yeah, so APD is, like I was just saying earlier, they're refusing to come into any kind of compliance with the DOJ. But before that, they refused to even acknowledge that they needed to be reformed. So if you were critical of APD, they came after you with a vengeance. And I remember being, as far as social media, I remember being blocked by them. They blocked my Twitter account. I hadn't even tweeted them, but they knew who I was, and they blocked me so I couldn't see what they were doing. Then they started doing ride-alongs where they did Twitter from the car. So they would tweet from the beat. That was their whole thing. And a lot of backlash was like, hey, I'd like to see your tweet from the beat, but you blocked a bunch of us. So they unblocked us from Twitter, and I was part of this huge group. It was crazy. I didn't realize how many they had blocked, but it was a shitload of people that were anti-police violence. Well, recently, the police chief has been refusing to have any press conferences because he doesn't like being asked questions and having to answer questions. So he's been making videos for YouTube. So let's say, John Smith is shot at a Walmart. Instead of having a press conference at the scene, he's making a video from the police headquarters and posting it on YouTube. So no reporters are able to ask him questions. So that's just a little backstory. Then what you're talking about, this just came out a couple weeks back. APD's been using Facebook to rip certain judges for letting certain people out of jail or off of whatever offense, and they talk about specific cases and specific people, and they have a comment section. So when they did this, in the comment section, all these people were writing, that judge should be killed. Wow. That judge should be beaten. We should find this guy. And so instead of APD monitoring their comment section and removing it, they left the shit. So it looked like, and if they didn't leave it on purpose, no matter what, the optics were horrible. You don't threaten judges. That's just, come on. Sure, we have a problem.
It really sounds as if they were deliberately setting up this judge for a comment.
And the media too. They slam the media, specific journalists. They slam in the media. So then these guys start going after journalists. They see you in the streets. They recognize you, and they'll start saying shit to me. It's beyond. And so when we talk about police reforms, we always talk about how they never really wanted to reform. They just want to reform image. It's about image reform and their public image. So when they do shit like that, they're not really helping their public image case out,
But have they ever really made a genuine attempt to change their policies? Or because you're talking about it's almost like a camouflage, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Even the way the DOJ was even the way the consent decree was originally written is not what went into place. After the union got a hold of it and rewrote it, they basically wrote it with all this language that made it toothless. So,
You know, no matter what they say about how they're going to change this or change that, in reality, they just change wording and keep doing the same shit they keep doing. I mean, they're not supposed to shoot into moving cars, and they keep doing it. And the videos come out, and they're not in danger of being run over, and they're still shooting people in the cars as they're moving. So, like, you know, I don't even know what to say sometimes anymore.
But again, the original report into the reforms, and I'm looking at a report now, and it says that someone in Chief Gordon Eden's command staff has been lying to the federally appointed monitor James Ginger, and that someone in Eden's command staff is engaged in warfare against the reform process being overseen by a U.S. District Court judge.
Yeah, that's the article I just sent you. Yeah, that's the command staff of APD. Let me tell you a quick story about these guys. Okay, the APD brass, the actual command staff that's running the show. Sometime mid last year, there was a bill going through that would allow more money to be allowed to go to the cops, but unfortunately, it was going to the APD brass and not the beat cops. And we have a serious shortage of beat cops. So a lot of city councilors were like, "Why are we giving the command staff raises and not our guys working the streets?" And two of our city councilors at council meeting brought it up and started, wondering why the command staff was getting these raises and not the beat cops. Well, our chief administrative officer, Rob Perry, who's basically a gangster. I mean, he's like the Albuquerque Dom, he goes up into the hallway and gets the brass to come into the council chambers to intimidate the council. They all stood at the back of their room with their arms folded, dogging the council into, how dare you take away our raises, fuck the beat cops. These guys that are at the helm, the command staff, they're fucking gangster, dude. Timothy Gonterman, who's head of one of the command centers themselves, he's like the chief of the command center. This dude burned a homeless man's ear off with a taser. The guy had doused himself with gasoline, and to prevent him from killing himself and lighting himself on fire, Mr. Gonterman shot him in the head with a taser and lit him on fire. Dude lost his ear, and he got promoted to the head of the command that command staff. So these guys that are running the show here, they're criminals. They're not just like corrupt. They're fucking criminals. So they're even, I mean, dude, they were threatening our DA. Our DA quit. We have a new one now, but she decided not to run again is what happened. But before she left office, she said that she was in fear for her life from our police department. Our district attorney was in fear for her life. So we've got one of the highest gang populations in the country. And then we got these guys as the protectors. So it leaves the community literally hanging out to dry. It's fucking crazy.
Makes you wonder, what's the point of having a police force if you can't actually trust them? What's the point of having a law enforcement if they serve no purpose but to keep themselves in a job? Because they're not dealing with the law. They're not reducing crime. They're not making the streets safer. They're not making the community better. They're not upholding principles or values. It seems to be a self-indulgent organization.
We get into that whole thing. Well, they're not all bad apples. That argument is always thrown out there. And we have good cops here that I've met personally out just being on the streets, and you meet all of them at some point or another. It seems like some of them multiple times a week, and some of them are very good guys, but they're not going to give up the freedom of their job to turn in the fellow bad apple. these guys, even though they claim to not make as much money as other cities this size, they still make a damn good living being a cop. And once you cross that blue line, you become one of us instantaneously. If you report on your fellow officer saying, like, this, it's happened here, Officer Cedric Greer beat a homeless man, turned off his lapel camera, beat him, and a cadet that was there for, like, with a ride along or training turned his ass in. That cadet wound up quitting because of instantaneous harassment. We have two good ex-APD officers that sometimes come and speak at tribunals or at protests, and they will both tell you that once you cross that line, you're not going to get, they're not even going to come back you up on a call. They will literally leave you out to dry on a call. So a lot of those good apples, to me, are not good apples. Even if they're the nicest fucking guy you've met, they've got a great family, they want you to come to their barbecue, they're still working for the oppressors, number one. Number two, they can't do anything about their fellow cops that are bad cops. You know, I mean,
they choose not to. I mean, because the bottom line is whether or not they come to back you up or not. That's not your argument, is it? Your argument is that if they're doing wrong, you stand up against it, irrespective.
Yeah, and the ones that do wind up having to quit.
Wow.
You know, I mean, we talk about harassment very lightly. I'm talking about physical harassment. People threatening to shoot you, threatening to kill you. I mean, these fuckers will come to your house. They'll fly an airplane over your house. I mean, this is no joke here. If you speak out against these guys, they're that gangster that they will come after you.
A law unto themselves.
And that's also why a lot of journalists haven't really attacked them like we do, because they have too much to lose. I mean, these guys will show up to your kids' school and ask your kids questions. I mean, I've been through everything. I've been through it all here, so I can testify that the harassment. I can't imagine what a fellow cop would be getting.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I mean, we've seen the pictures and the videos with you, so you know, I can testify that I've seen the evidence. I know what you went through when you went through what you went through just this past 12 months or so, and we still sit here gobsmacked that we're not actually talking about a bunch of thugs. We're actually talking about a law enforcement agency. You know, state.
I don't know the difference sometimes.
It's hard to tell the difference sometimes. Just trying to go up into as we head into our last half hour. There's just a couple of more things that we really want to go into before we finish, and I didn't want to miss this out. We are talking about the rise and the use of social media by the APD in order to. But something else quite more sinister has reared up its ugly head in and amongst all of this, and it's the rise of the militia.
Yeah.
You kind of touched on it earlier on, and you say it goes way back to when Bundy was and the water crisis, right?
Well, yeah, they've been around. The militia groups have been prevalent in the United States for quite a while, but you didn't hear of them or really see of them in the public until social media came along and allowed that, and online allowed it. But when the Bundy standoff went down, I believe that was 2014, at the same time, we had an immigrant rights crisis going on here at the same time. A lot of people were coming here. Trying to remember where they were coming from, but can't off the top of my head. But we were putting thousands and thousands of people in these almost like internment camp type of places, and then deporting them. Well, this was happening at the same time that the Bundy standoff was happening, and they started really getting a lot of attention and getting more people to join. And when that Bundy standoff went down, they put out an all call to all these different groups to unite under one banner, and they started showing up down there on his ranch and pointing rifles at federal agents who were trying to get their cattle off the land that he was illegally grazing on. So that to me was the first, and this is just from my own personal researching, because that's just when I started seeing them come onto the scene. Others might have seen it before I did because I wasn't as socially active back then, but they started getting that rise, and then they were really prevalent at the border anyways. They were vigilantes doing border patrol. New Mexico knew of them because of that. There was stories that had come out on these rogue militia groups that go down to the border and do their own policing of illegals crossing. So right away you have ex-military, mostly all white, almost exclusively white, ex-military, very racist towards everybody, and they have nothing to do, and they have a pension. They have a military pension, so they're funded basically. And they go down and they have these groups that do these drive-in Jeeps and Humvees through the desert looking for illegals. Then Ferguson happened. The two uprisings in Ferguson, and these militia groups, in particular the Oath Keepers, decided they were going to go there and be police to the police. They were going to stand in front and be the barrier to the police. People at Ferguson didn't want their asses there and basically told them to get the hell out, and they never really did any. They were just there, and that was that. Now, after the Trump here in Albuquerque, after the Trump rally and all the chaos that ensued, the militiamen started showing up to regular actions, in particular anti-police actions or police brutality actions, as a form of a barrier between them and the police. And they're showing up with handcuffs and AR-15s and sidearms and standing on federal property, and nothing's being done because the cops are on their side. They're, a lot of those cops are ex-military, most of them, and they side with them. It's one side or the other. But we've seen this really big uptick in militia, and then in particular here, they show up, they intimidate a bunch of middle-aged women and a few young kids, some anons with weapons, and then they send one guy in particular to start following people, myself included. I started seeing the same guy. I saw him at the second Trump rally. Then I saw him again when Milo came here. Then I saw him again. I mean, this dude would just be in the audience, and he was just there to spy on protesters and relay information back, whatever he was gathering.
Did you feel threatened at any time, Andy?
I did. I felt threatened, and I didn't even really know why. I felt threatened when they showed up with AR-15s at that protest, but when this man was showing up at protests and following myself and others around, like we would be walking around and he'd be right on our back with an earpiece, and you turn around and there's cops around you and shit, and it was very uncomfortable. I felt very threatened. I even confronted this guy at Planned Parenthood. There was a bunch of anti-abortion people there, and I went to interview them and the counter protest that was there. And here's this guy again, the same fucking militia guy. So I called him out, asked him who he was, and he wouldn't answer. He got real combative with me, telling me he'll kick my ass if I come any closer to him and all this stuff. And anyways, 5 days after that, he got beat up in an immigrants' rights protest that I wasn't at. I was at work on a job, couldn't make it. And this guy showed up, and two girls that are Anons wearing their Guy Fawkes masks confronted him because he had followed them at the Women's March all the way into the parking garage, mind you, when they went to leave. These are high school girls, and he was following them around. Anyway, they confronted him, and long story short, one of them would not leave the guy alone, and she said something about he was filming her, and she said, "You're filming," and I don't know, something about why you filming me. The comment was made to her from him, "Why don't you show your tits?" And she slapped the phone out of his hand. He grabs her by the throat and then got his ass kicked by about 20 people that were standing around, mostly skateboarders. They just beat the shit out of this guy. So we tracked him down after. As he's leaving, Dinah, my partner Dinah, is filming him getting escorted out by Ilsa and another person were escorting him out so he didn't get beat up on his way out. And Dinah was following him, and he turns to her and starts accusing Dinah of being one of them and being one of the bad guys and all this really crazy irrational shit. And we wound up tracking him down, and our editor, since he wasn't really involved in any of it, went and interviewed him and did a story on him. And he claimed he wasn't with militia, that he was just there to he's retired and he's lonely, and he just wanted to get involved and see observe, which wasn't the case at all. It turns out the guy, he is militia, and he was there spying on people. He got so angry at the article that we published on him that he sent a angry ass email to our editor Tom about what happened to him, about how I'm a liar, because I was quoted in the story. I'm a liar. Dinah's a little bitch, a nasty bitch is what he called her. Basically said that we set him up to be beat up, that we did. And that he's lonely, that he has nothing to live for, and basically his wording was very similar to some lone wolf mass shooting manifesto.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was for real. And I mean, Tom had to report it. As much as I didn't go to the police. I really try to stay away from them as much as possible. But you follow people around like stalking type of behavior. Don't know. You would not talk to us when we did confront him and state his position. And here we are getting basically threatened, saying we're the ones that set him up. So when he's saying all this, his militia buddies think that we did this to him. So, excuse me, it makes going out into the streets the next time very, very fucking nerve-wracking, dude.
I suppose you become very apprehensive, and those who are regular, who are aware of this transformation of power, so to speak, will be a bit apprehensive as to be going out onto some of these demonstrations. I mean, I'm trying to remember the one which was towards the end of last year where these guys were dressed up in black, and it was a Black Lives Matter protest, and shots were being fired and police officers were killed and shot from a car park area. Do you remember the one I'm on about now?
Where was this?
This was. I'm trying to remember where it was now. Was it? It wasn't Detroit, was it? It was one where Black Lives Matter were demonstrating, and you had.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
That was Minnesota, and that guy's trial just went on recently, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember his name, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But here's the thing, it's now going to turn protesting, or how people turn up to protest, on its head, because if people are under the impression that militia are going to turn up armed, then you're more likely to have some of these more younger, aggressive, new upbeat protesters also turning up armed.
I hope so. I haven't seen it, but I hope so. I believe that. What are we going to do?
curving? Are we just going to stand there while they show up with weapons?
I
mean, I'm at the point now where what I've seen in I've had 2 guns pulled on me in the last, almost a full year now. But that protest we talked about earlier, where the guy ran through the riot line and his truck was hit with the stick, I was at the guy's window yelling at him while I was streaming, and he pulled out a gun and pointed it at us. And then there was a Black Lives Matter protest here at an Italian restaurant called Paisano's. The owner thinks it's hilarious to sell merchandise that say Black Olives Matter. It made national news, but he had signs up outside, Black Olives Matter, and he sells all this merchandise. So of course there's going to be black backlash. I mean, this is ridiculous. You know, he thinks it's a joke. He's white. He thinks it's funny. He thinks Black Lives Matter is a joke. So he's capitalizing off of it. So people went to protest him there. I was there on the street once again, live streaming, and sure enough, this motherfucker owner shows up, pulls his gun out, and starts pointing at people, and including 2 12-year-olds that were there. Police were across the street watching the whole time, didn't do shit. 3 calls to APD, they didn't do anything. Finally, someone went across the street and forced them to come over and do a report on it. And that guy, nothing, no charges, no nothing. Pulls a pistol out on us. So yeah, it unfortunately, if I and my you know, the people that I've been documenting for the last few years, if they were to show up armed and something was to happen between the 2 sides, they're the ones that are going to get arrested. They'll be the ones that are going to be prosecuted, not the other side, because the law is not on our side. Period. It's on the side of the right, the Reich.
You know, this uprising of militia. Again, yes, you can attribute it. You can turn around and say that it's been around for a long time. It has. But it's been very clear for those who are watching from the sidelines that they have gained prominence and a boldness of confidence since Trump started making some of the statements that he's been making, especially about immigrants and immigration. Would you not agree?
I agree 100%. He's given. I mean, these are already racist ass people. Trump's not dividing us. We've always been divided, and these are very, very, very racist people. But his rhetoric and his anti-Mexican and build the wall, chanting "build the wall," and Mexico is going to pay for it, which is not right. And all these, you know, I watched the Muslims on 9/11 celebrating in New Jersey. You know, like that didn't happen. But all that shit he says is exactly what these militia people already thought. So now they're like, all right, you know, our boy is in office. Let him fuck with me. You know, it's time. You know, he even said, you know, you hurt a protester, I'll pay for you. I'll pay for it. And that's the attitude that it's carried over. It's definitely gotten worse. If you look at the statistics with the Southern Poverty Crime Center, it shows that hate crimes have increased substantially. And militia is a part of it, but the alt-right, that part of the right wing, that alt-right, militia might as well be thrown in that group. I mean, let's just be real. They're the same ideologies, anyways. It's fucking scary.
We're heading towards scary times, bearing in mind that we've still got 3.5 years potentially, unless he gets impeached.
Civil war or what?
Yeah, we got 3.5 years left of this. Is anywhere safe?
Yeah, I don't know. In the United States, I don't think so. I'm gonna move to my homeland in Norway, dude. Screw this. Yeah, no, I don't know where to turn. I don't think there is any answers of anything other than the fact that everything is so fucked up, and we just have to keep fighting. And I refuse to use that word resist anymore. I did it first,
But now I'm more like, we need a revolt. Resisting isn't going to cut it. This is fucked.
There's a lot of people talking about revolution, and it needs to be a revolution. We've been there before. We've seen what the outcome. We've seen how much blood runs on the streets. Can we take another blood count?
I think so. I think that our society is. We've always survived through it. Every revolution that's ever been successful has been violent. Every single one of them. I see small pockets of civil war breaking out on the streets of the United States every weekend. We've got a movement of the alt-right, the militia versus anti-fascism, anti-fascists. There's literal pockets of civil war going on. We're already there. No matter what happens, we're looking at some bad things ahead, because let's just throw it out there. Let's just say Trump is impeached or is forced to resign. I have this feeling, and I could be wrong, but if that happened, I think the violence on the streets would get worse. I think that the people would be losing their minds, and I mean the right. And I said it before. I said it if Trump lost the election overall, I was saying that the right was going to lose it and be violent in the streets, because before he won, he was already claiming that he was going to lose to a rigged election. So he had already got his fan base ready for war. And this is war on our streets between the two. Mind you, it may not happen every day, but it's and it may not happen in every town. It hasn't. We haven't in Albuquerque. We haven't had that back and forth quite as bad yet. Nothing like what's been going on in South and North Carolina, New Orleans, and Berkeley, California. We're not seeing that here because our population demographics are a lot different. But there is a revolution, and it's already. I mean, the violent revolution, and it's already started. We're already in it. We're in the middle of it. Not in the middle of it, but we're in the onset of it.
Well, Andy, it's always a pleasure talking to you and sharing the airways with you. What hope have we got for progressive, genuine, integral journalism?
Don't put hope on it. Don't put hope on me, dude. I'm not a religious person, Kervin. I don't have any hope. I don't have any faith. I've lost it all. I thought I had some up until 150 days ago, or whatever it's been. I mean, every day my hope is being shattered. Everything's stepping down from the head of the EPA being a climate change denialist, to the Jeff Sessions and our idiot Secretary of Education. I have a son that's about to go into high school, and I can't afford to put him in a charter school. I got to keep him in public school, and public school is taking a beating, and now our Secretary of Education's a pile of shit. So everything, then this Steve Bannon in the White House, everything is so bleak. The only advice I can give is to just, if you're going to go down swinging. That's what I'm going to do. Fuck the dumb shit. If I wind up in jail for civil disobedience, so be it. We have to take these risks. We have to be willing to put our lives on the line. I have already done it, and will do it again. I will put my body in between Black lives and other people of color. As far as hope for a positive outcome, it's bleak, but it is there. Because if we don't have any kind of hope, what are we doing? Period.
And there we have it, Andy. Once again, it's been a great 2 hours. And again, we just look forward to meeting with you again soon, hopefully updating again on another show. Looking forward to maybe linking up with Ilsa and Dinah, maybe having the three of you together.
Let's do it. I got some other people on the back burner too. That a friend of ours that's spent a lot of time in Standing Rock. That's
needing to get some stories out, some of the police atrocities that have gone on to Native people for way too long.
Let's do it. Let's hook up. Let's arrange it, and let's get it on, Andy.
I'm there, dude.
Okay.
I'm there. Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it, bud.
Well, once again, thank you very much, Andy Christopherson. This has been me and Andy on World Jam Global Radio's Issues Today. It's time to say goodbye. We're out of here.
World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity.
Oh, I just want to say a big thank you to Andy once again. Update in Albuquerque. Don't forget you can join me tomorrow morning for the Wake Up Everybody Sunday Gospel Show.
I paid for my crime.
Join me again next Saturday night, same time, same place, for another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time.
Whatever you say,
I paid for my crime.
however you feel, cards are heavily stacked against us.
Back in
But we got to have hope. There's got to be hope.
the system, it was all about survival.
As Andy just said, without hope, what are we doing?
I had
Where are we going?
rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man
In this life, there just ain't no giving up.
hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a change
You can hear the despondency.
man. It ain't
You can hear the discouragement, even as Andy spoke.
been it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time.
It's a tough world out there.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
But we just cannot afford to give up.
My time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
And don't bother flick your eyes or turn your head,
Already did my time.
because Albuquerque could be happening in your city. It could be your town. It could be your village. It could be your street.
For fly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you.
But we just got to have faith.
I was doing all kind of stupid shit.
We got to believe some good is going to come out of this somehow.
Since I've gotten older,
Because without hope,
I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb.
we are well and truly lost.
Forrest Gump, but I was
My name is Kervin Julian. This has been another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
much meaner than
I
Arnold.
want to say thank you all for joining me.
Up and spit you out like a real alligator.
Wherever you are, wherever you've been. Look forward to sharing the airwaves with you again next week. We're out of here.
Facing life in prison.
Already did my time. Paid for my crime.
World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity.
Already did my time. Paid for my crime. Already did my time. Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail.
I believe next week we shall have Reggie Williams
Did my time. I paid for my crime.
as our guest speaker.
My time.
And we're looking at the case of Jonathan Irons.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
We're going to be hearing from his advocacy team.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Another wrongful conviction.
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real force.